The playful princess got captured right on the battlefield, and the enemy demanded a hostage exchange. Lu Wei, leading our troops, shot a glance at me, the one disguised as a man standing at his side. I've been with Lu Wei for over a decade, fighting by his side through life and death and earning countless honors together. Only he knew my secret as a woman, and he'd even sworn his eternal love to me. But when he saw the enemy's blade pressed against the princess's neck, his heart clearly broke. He promised, "Once we get the princess back, I'll come for you." I was handed over to the enemy by Lu Wei himself. As the cold steel rested against my neck, I caught sight of him cradling the rescued princess in his arms. Dragged into the enemy camp, I waited day and night for Lu Wei to come save me, only to hear that he was about to marry the princess. That very night, right in front of Emperor Xiaolin of the enemy nation, I unbound my chest and boldly climbed onto his imperial bed. Later, Lu Wei even issued a challenge, declaring he'd come for me. I lazily looked at Xiaolin, who was busy making a child laugh, and replied, "It's my son's full-month celebration tonight. Don't come ruin the fun." That set Lu Wei off into a rage. On the battlefield, with our armies facing off, the enemy held a steel knife to the princess's neck and roared, "I hear that Princess Jinyu is your nation's most treasured imperial daughter. If you want to save her, trade her for your crown prince." The princess trembled uncontrollably, sobbing weakly, "Lu Wei, save me." General Lu Wei's expression turned stone serious. 3 days earlier, the princess had decided to enjoy herself at the border, flaunting her royal airs. Somehow she'd heard about a valley along the frontier bursting with exotic peonies, and she insisted on going to admire the blooms. When the military commanders tried to stop her, she snapped, "Aren't you fighters supposed to win battles so that I can go wherever I want to enjoy the flowers? Otherwise, what's the point of your victories? And if you dare hold me back, I'll have my father cut your rations." At that time, Lu Wei and I were out scouting the terrain, so no one in camp dared defy her. So the princess set off for that border-adjacent valley with a few handmaidens and guards. She even brought along a painter, planning to have him capture the scene in a work titled "The Princess Admiring the Blossoms." Just as she was reveling in the beauty of the moment, enemy troops ambushed from among the flowers, slaughtering all her guards, handmaidens, and even the painter, leaving her captured alive. Up until today, Lu Wei and I were certain of victory. But no one expected that, at the critical moment, the enemy would drag the princess right to the front, leaving our entire army paralyzed. The battleground to a standstill. Faced with the enemy's outrageous demand, someone in our ranks shouted, "Our crown prince is of unmatched nobility. He wouldn't dare risk his life on the border." The enemy commander's eyes then landed on me. "Isn't this the perfect substitute for a crown prince?" he sneered. Lu Wei's gaze also turned to me. I had been abandoned by my father in the military camp as a child, and it was only by disguising myself as a man that I managed to preserve my honor. Everyone in the army, and even at court, believed I was the crown prince. Only Lu Wei knew that I was really a princess. But compared to Princess Jinyu, who was showered with endless adoration, I, Zhaoning, was nothing more than a fallen princess, burdened from birth with the weight of my mother's clan sins. For over 10 years I had fought alongside Lu Wei, sharing every peril and victory. Only he knew my secret, and under the border's moonlight he had promised me his lifetime. Yet when he saw the enemy's blade at the princess's throat, his heart ached. Again he vowed, "Once we exchange the princess, I'll come save you." He explained, "There's no other choice. You must use your assumed identity as the crown prince to deceive them for now. Once the princess is safe, I'll come for you immediately." Looking up at him, I asked, "Is that an order?" After a brief hesitation, he replied, "It's a military order." And so, following his command, I agreed. Lu Wei himself delivered me into the enemy commander's hands. As the steel blade was moved from Princess Jinyu's neck, it ended up resting on my shoulder. The enemy commander, assuming I was a man, struck harder, the knife leaving a thin slash of blood along my neck. In my pain, I could only watch as Lu Wei tightly embraced the princess. I thought, "General, I always knew you'd save me." The princess clung to him like a wounded rabbit, her trembling, fragile form stirring sympathy. Lu Wei held her with such tenderness, so moved by her cries, that he missed his best chance to rescue me. By the time he had calmed her down and remembered to come for me, I had already been carted off into the enemy camp. When I next came to, I was bound hand and foot and tossed onto a cot inside a tent. Alarm bells rang in my head as I quickly checked my clothes. Thankfully, my binding was still intact. I exhaled in relief, only to suddenly feel utterly weak. Had they drugged me? Glancing around at the tent's furnishings, I realized this was clearly the commander's own tent. Something was off. Why were auspicious dragon totems everywhere? Rumor had it that the ruler of Qiguo was personally leading this campaign. No way. Just then, the tent's curtain was pulled aside and a deep, gruff voice announced, "Your Majesty, the sixth prince exchanged for the princess has been dosed with a muscle relaxant and is now on the cot." On the cot? I thought in disbelief. As I writhed on the cot, a tall figure loomed over me. He was strikingly handsome, with a captivating red mole at the corner of his eye, yet his brows exuded the unmistakable aura of an emperor. Leaning in close, an almost maddening scent of cold sandalwood filled my nostrils, a scent emanating from the string of sandalwood prayer beads he held in his hand. Xie Lin, the new emperor of Qiguo, had been on the throne for less than 3 years, and in that time he'd swallowed up every small state that had ever dared breach our border. With each conquered nation, another bead was added to his string. They said he kept those beads in his hand as a reminder of the weight of his ruthless conquests. Now his string had 17 beads. Our state of Yu was the last great power capable of standing up to Qiguo, but with one misstep, we might become his 18th bead. "Hey, get away from me," I cried out. Xie Lin's right hand, still wrapped around his prayer beads, snapped up my chin. Squinting inquisitively, he asked, "Do you stutter?" "Stutter? You're the one who stutters." I shot back instantly. He chuckled softly. "So, how does it feel that Lu Wei abandoned you for the princess?" I'd spent years honing my skills in the military, and ever since our two nations went to war, I had served as Lu Wei's behind-the-scenes strategist. Both openly and in secret, I'd already clashed with Xie Lin many times before. I'm not exactly afraid of him, but today, being this close to him for the first time, and with the drug still coursing through my veins, I can't help but feel a little intimidated. All I know is that until Lu Wei comes to rescue me, my assumed status as the crown prince is my only shield. Even the most downtrodden crown prince can scrape by in an enemy nation as a hostage. But if he finds out that I'm really a woman, and an unloved princess at that, my fate would be disastrous. The princess is a woman, and I'm her imperial brother. A brother who saves his sister is a hero. I insisted stubbornly. Xie Lin stared at me for a long while, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Suddenly, he ran a finger from my neck down to my collar. I was terrified. Yet his hand didn't slip under my collar. Instead, he began untying the ropes binding my wrists. For a moment, I wondered if it was just my imagination, but when he saw the red marks on my wrists, his gaze darkened noticeably. "So, you really dare untie me? Aren't you not afraid I might kill you?" he teased. Hearing that, he turned, retrieved a dagger, and handed it directly into my palm. "Come on, kill me," he goaded. I reached out for the dagger immediately. But not only could I not bring myself to kill him, I couldn't even get a firm grip on its hilt. "I'm not only daring enough to untie you," he continued in that imperious tone. "I plan to keep you here as my little slave. Without the antidote, that muscle-relaxing powder will leave you so weak you won't even be able to lift a spoon. No matter what I do to you, you won't be able to resist." As he said this, he deliberately leaned closer. I was so drained of strength that I couldn't do anything, my face flushing red. Xie Lin chuckled softly. "What are you so shy about? Do you think I'm so desperate that I'd eat just anything? I don't like men." Eventually, Xie Lin kicked both me and the dagger off the bed, then climbed up himself and promptly fell into a deep sleep. I tried several times to pick up the dagger, but every attempt failed. I finally just slumped down by the bed's edge, utterly exhausted. I gingerly touched my chest. Thankfully, it wasn't large and my chest binder was tight enough. Otherwise, being this close, Xiaolin would have surely discovered my secret. Lu Wei will come for me. Clutching my knees, I recalled how, as a child in the palace, whenever I stood next to Princess Jinyu, Lu Wei never even glanced in my direction. Back then, he was the crown prince's tutor, and he treated me better than any of my elder brothers. When I asked why, he said it was because I was the sister who most resembled Princess Jinyu among all the imperial daughters. Later in the camp, I once asked if I was merely a stand-in for my elder sister. Lu Wei pinched my nose and chided that I was just speaking like a child, that a little remark from my youth could be remembered for so long. He even recalled how we'd been through life and death battles together, and that he knew my one secret. Zhaoning, no one can come between us. Yet on the battlefield, he didn't hesitate to choose my elder sister. I spent the entire night wide awake, trying to rationalize, by now, he should have already taken care of the princess, right? Even if it meant spending a whole night in camp securing a military doctor for her, that'd be enough time. By early morning, he should have mustered his troops to come for me, if only to show me that he at least intended to save me. But I waited all night, and when dawn broke, Lu Wei still hadn't come for my rescue. Refusing to give up, I waited another 3 days. During those days, confined in Xiaolin's tent, I felt utterly weak and was daily overwhelmed by that intimidating scent of sandalwood, but at least I never went hungry or thirsty. I've read the history books. I know that while a crown prince held hostage in enemy territory endures humiliation, he's never left wanting for food or clothing. Yet, hardly any of those hostages ended up being kept by the emperor as a little bed slave. In moments like these, I'm just grateful that my chest is flat and my voice deep. So long as no one strips me of my clothes, I can keep up the ruse as the crown prince. After feeding me that muscle relaxant, Xiaolin made no effort to guard against me. So much so that one day, while he was away, I cautiously slipped out of his tent. Everyone in the camp treated me as if I were invisible. I dashed to a corner and whistled with my finger. Lu Wei and I had raised several thousand carrier pigeons in the camp. They were scattered all around, circling above the border between our nations, and I had trained them to obey my commands. Sure enough, as soon as I whistled, a pigeon landed by my side with a letter tied to its leg. Lu Wei had sent me a message. I unfolded it, expecting orders for an escape plan, but instead, it read, "I've heard that you're being treated like a prized hostage in the enemy camp. Why not use this opportunity to work as an inside man for my army? With Princess Jinyu in peril this time, the emperor is sure to hold me accountable, and I must achieve a great feat to avoid punishment. Zhaoning, lure the enemy in gradually. Bide your time, and once you help me succeed, I promise I'll beg the emperor to let me marry you." So he wanted me to continue staying in the enemy camp and help him atone by earning merit. I waited another 3 days, and then I heard that Lu Wei was planning to pull his troops out and return to the capital. Apparently, Princess Jinyu couldn't stand the hardships at the border and was demanding that Lu Wei accompany her back to the capital. I overheard one of Xiaolin's generals say it in his tent. "So, they're heading back to the capital?
And what about me?"
A month later, that same general reported, "Word has spread throughout you that Princess Jinyu was captured by our forces. Her solitary fall into enemy hands has had officials and generals alike questioning her honor." He made no attempt to hide his meaning, adding, "Lu Wei, to preserve the princess's reputation, has parlayed his military achievements into a petition to the Yu Emperor to let him marry Princess Jinyu. It seems the wedding is imminent." Military achievements? Are those the very victories I helped Lu Wei secure behind the scenes? He once said that on the day he returned triumphant to the capital, his military merits would be the ticket to restoring my identity as a princess and petitioning to marry me. I never wanted to play the role of a crown prince. I'm a princess. I want the world to know that a princess can also accomplish great feats in a military camp. But what now? All these years I devoted myself to Lu Wei turned out to be nothing more than sewing a bridal gown for my elder sister. When Lu Wei petitioned to marry the princess, did he ever remember that he'd left me in the enemy camp for over a month? He doesn't remember. That night, noticing how lost in thought I was, Xiaolin commanded, "Little slave, help me change my clothes." Coming back to my senses, I realized that in the flickering candlelight, Xiaolin's chiseled physique, perfect features, and brilliant military record were by no means inferior. In fact, they far surpassed those of General Lu Wei. Lu Wei is going to marry the princess, and my own father left me to fend for myself in the palace when I was a child. No one ever came to save me. I have no choice but to save myself. I obediently stepped forward towards Xiaolin and extended my hand, not to help him change, but to adjust my own sash. Right before his eyes, I removed my outer robe and then took out the hairpin that had kept my hair in place. My jet black hair cascaded down like a waterfall. Then, I unbound the chest binder that had been hiding my true identity as a woman. "Your Majesty, if you don't like men, does that mean you prefer women?" He grabbed my restless hand and said, "They all say I'm a tyrant. Aren't you afraid of me? I only execute those damned souls who have wronged you, and I won't let you down, so there's nothing to fear." That night, no candle burned as brightly as the light in Xiaolin's eyes. He pinned me to the bed and went to work on me. The so-called dragon bed in the tent was nothing compared to those in the palace. It creaked and groaned all through the night. "I know you accepted Lu Wei's pigeon-delivered message," Xiaolin said, interrogating me with the torture devices he had on him. He bit my ear and asked, "What did it say?" "It said, let me lure the enemy deeper," I replied. I planned to obey. Using my damp, sweaty hand, I wrapped around his neck and cooed, "Your Majesty, then go even deeper." The next morning, one of Xiaolin's trusted aides burst into the tent with his usual intelligence report and happened to catch sight of a few rumpled men's undergarments hanging on the folding screen. At that moment, the imposing emperor, looking completely satisfied, emerged from behind the screen and picked up the outer robe that had been tossed onto a chair the previous night. The aide's eyes darted back and forth between the emperor and the clothes on the floor a dozen times before he suddenly stamped his foot in exasperation and declared, "I told you, Your Majesty, you should have chosen a consort by now. 3 years on the throne, and you haven't even touched a woman. Now you're so starved you'll eat anything. That hostage is a man. A man indeed." I was already clear-headed, though my waist still throbbed with pain, and upon hearing his words, it all clicked. "Oh, so Your Majesty has been starving for 3 years. No wonder you were so intense last night." Before I could finish, Xiaolin clamped his hand over my mouth. When I spoke, I deliberately used my natural voice with an affected, smooth, and sweet lilt. Though the aide dared not peek behind the screen, he could still judge from my tone. After his shock, he even gave a thumbs up and said, "Your Majesty sure eats well." Xiaolin shot him a sidelong glance and, without missing a beat, draped an outer robe embroidered with dragons and swirling clouds around me. I took a closer look. It was the very same regular dragon robe he'd worn yesterday. In a low voice he chided, "You're a princess too. Aren't you even a little ashamed?" I laughed and replied, "At this point, why be ashamed? What's there to pretend?" His handsome face set into a stern expression, as if on the verge of anger, yet he ended up only giving my waist a light pinch beneath the covers. I smiled to myself. Last night I discovered that while Xiaolin outwardly appeared a ruthless, merciless tyrant, once he crossed into intimate territory, he became embarrassingly bashful, unable to withstand even the slightest teasing. In his disordered passion last night, that sly man had even tried to worm the layout of Yu's border defenses from me. I stayed on guard. No matter how much he prodded or coaxed, I refused to answer directly, instead replying with some wanton, lewd remarks that left his little face flushed with embarrassment. When he asked where I'd picked up those lines, I said, "From those racy storybooks in the camp." Xiaolin's gaze shifted as he said, "The private education in the Yu royal family is truly one of a kind. You really shouldn't be picking up lewd language from those thuggish soldiers." He had no idea that this was all part of my plan. As long as I kept up this air of frivolity, he wouldn't be able to pry for any intelligence. I want to save myself, I want to live, but that doesn't mean I'll betray my motherland. After all that happened last night, I've pretty much lost all shame. When you're fighting for survival, you don't fuss over whether your methods are base or noble. After spending over 10 years in the military camp, I've never once abided by the strict rules imposed on women. I leaned in close, blinking playfully as I said, "Doesn't your majesty love that I'm so unruly? Last night you—" "Enough, there's no need for you to recount it," he snapped. His ears flushed bright red as he turned away from me. With his right hand clenched into a fist, he let out 2 tactical coughs before suddenly remembering the disheveled aide outside the screen. "What's got you so flustered?" the aide asked timidly. Bowing his head and averting his eyes, he slipped behind the screen to deliver a report. Summoning my courage, I edged closer. This was an intelligence report gathered by Xia Lin's network of spies in the Imperial City, almost like an official chronicle detailing every significant change among the palace's key figures. Seeing me approach, Xia Lin folded the report and I shook his arm insistently. "Let's take a look together. Didn't we see everything last night? Now, why hide anything?" Exasperated by my chatter, Xia Lin, clearly giving me a headache, relented. "Over the past month, plenty had happened in Yu. At the Yu Imperial Palace, the ailing Princess Jinyu had been summoned before the court by the old emperor and forced to kneel and admit her mistakes. Word had long spread throughout Yu about her capricious decision to go admire the flowers along the border, and how that very decision led to her capture. After she was rescued and brought back to the capital, she became the subject of rampant gossip and was impeached by government censors. Publicly, the censors decried that Princess Jinyu, disregarding the bigger picture, had been willful and unruly and deserved punishment. In private, the common people cursed her as nothing more than a troublemaker and a drama queen, saying that if she wanted to court disaster on the border, so be it, but she shouldn't drag others down with her. After she managed to escape from the enemy camp, people not only questioned her honor, but insisted she deserved every bit of her fate. Her capricious behavior had even cost the front line a vital victory. If the princess weren't punished, public discontent would surely boil over and leave the soldiers disheartened. Consequently, once Princess Jinyu's health improved even slightly, the emperor had her hauled into court. There she was, awkwardly kneeling, her fragile form nearly breaking under the pressure, while the censors lambasted her. With a face full of grievance and no strength to defend herself, she cast an innocent look toward Lu Wei, who stood at the forefront of the military officers. The princess was so delicate she seemed ready to shatter, and Lu Wei, clearly pained, stepped forward to defend her. "This matter can't be entirely blamed on the princess. If anyone's to blame, blame it on the 6th prince." The 6th prince he referred to was me. I am the 6th in line, and when I disguised myself as a man, I assumed the title of 6th prince, taking the alias Yuning. Just the mention of my name left the officials momentarily stunned. Even my father, seated there, seemed to just recall that I existed. All these years I've been in the military camp, serving as Lu Wei's behind-the-scenes strategist. Lu Wei claimed that because my maternal family was tainted by guilt, I mustn't stand out too much. Thus, every victory that I helped plan was credited solely to him. As a result, nobody in the court or military knew that the neglected 6th prince had kept our border secure for 10 years. And when Lu Wei exchanged me for the princess, he wouldn't have dared hide that fact. You see, even though it was known that I had been captured and taken into the enemy state, my father refused to acknowledge that he had a daughter. It was all because the 6th prince, an ignorant, reckless boy, lured the princess to a valley to admire rare flowers, inadvertently leading her straight into an enemy ambush that cost everyone by her side their lives. Lu Wei defended the princess, declaring, "Now that the 6th prince is trapped in the enemy camp, essentially serving as a hostage, he's already paying for his misdeed against his elder sister." As a rising star among military commanders and a first-hand witness to the incident, his words naturally won the confidence of all the civil and military officials. In that light, The fault could not possibly lie with the princess. "Jinyu, my child, stand up," the old emperor said gently, exhaling in relief. "Today, your appearance before the court to atone is merely a formality to appease public outrage. As for the sixth prince, what a dissolute, unprincipled wretch he is. And you, born stained by your mother's treason, if you can be saved, then save you. If not, just cast you aside. You're ultimately inconsequential." Lu Wei opened his mouth to protest, but said nothing further. In front of the assembled officials and generals, he helped the princess to her feet. Yet before she could fully stand, she collapsed into his arms, so fragile and delicate that he had no choice but to carry her. While cradled in his embrace, the princess asked, "Aren't you worried that little sister Zhaoning will be upset with you when she returns? If she wants to go back to you, I'll have to lead troops to rescue her, and when she sees how bloodied you get fighting for her, she surely won't be able to hold it against you." Lu Wei replied, "But she's a woman after all. I can't keep her waiting too long. It's only natural that you rescue little Zhaoning, but I have one request. Could you wait until after our wedding to set out for her rescue?" Jinyu snuggled against Lu Wei's chest, her voice as soft as water. "General, without you, even if I were rescued from the enemy, to preserve the honor of the imperial family, I'd have no choice but to end my own life with a white ribbon. If you don't marry me first, by the time you rescue my little sister, I fear I'll already be dead." Lu Wei's heart softened instantly. "Fine, after we marry, I'll go rescue Zhaoning." Jinyu's eyes lit up. "Really? After all, Zhaoning has been scraping and fighting in the camp for years, tough as nails, unlike you, the delicate and naive princess who needs protection. Without me, you'd die. But without me, Zhaoning would only suffer a few hardships in the enemy camp." Lu Wei murmured gently, "Princess, how could I ever forsake you? As for Zhaoning, she can wait." Before long, the marriage edict was issued. The date for the grand wedding would be set once the national astrologer calculated an auspicious time. The astrologer scribbled several favorable dates on red paper and handed them to the princess, casually remarking, "The 12th of next month would be perfect." The princess glanced at the dates and retorted, "Why are they all within the next month? My wedding is a grand celebration. It would take the entire palace at least 6 months to prepare properly. How can you settle for just 1 month?" The astrologer explained, "I heard that General Lu intends to lead troops to rescue the sixth prince after the wedding, and that rescue is of utmost importance. That's why I only considered auspicious dates within the coming month. The sooner you marry, the sooner the sixth prince can escape." At that moment, as Lu Wei reached the doorway and paused, he heard the princess say, "The astrologer really thought of everything. Am I really supposed to accommodate that unloved prince in my marriage? The wedding should be set for 6 months later." Frowning, Lu Wei stormed in and declared, "6 months is absolutely out of the question. If you think 1 month is too rushed, then set it for 3 months later. Have the astrologer wait in the main hall. I'll discuss this with you in detail." The moment the astrologer left, the princess pounded the table and cried, "After being held captive in the enemy camp for 3 days and nights, my honor is in ruins. Only a sensational wedding can restore my reputation, and 3 months is simply too short. If we wait 6 months, I fear I'll end up on the border collecting Zhaoning's remains." Lu Wei was equally adamant. "You care about her that much? Zhaoning has stood by me at the border for 10 years. Even if you claim there's no affection between us, surely the princess wouldn't believe that. I know Zhaoning's clever enough to endure 3 months in enemy territory, but if you plan to drag it out to 6 months and risk her life, I simply cannot agree." His tone unyielding, with the princess's determination pressed against him, she gritted her teeth and finally relented. "Fine, 3 months it is." The princess mused to herself that 3 months would be plenty of time for that tyrant Xiaolin to discover my true gender disguise, and perhaps grind Zhaoning into oblivion in the process. After all, Xiaolin truly tormented me day after day. From the rough beast-skin dragon bed in the border camp, to the rattling 8-horse carriage on the way back to the capital, and finally from that jostling ride to the stable, sumptuous dragon bed in the Qiguo imperial palace. It wasn't until I arrived at the Qiguo palace that I discovered Xielin's harem was utterly empty. Rumor had it that even in his own mansion, he shunned women entirely, devoting himself solely to military strategy and martial arts. The previous two emperors had misruled the state, leaving Qiguo impoverished and weak. At that time, the 17 so-called barbarian states, more like scattered nomadic tribes, nibbled away at Qiguo's lands like rats. These tribes, skilled in mounted warfare and notoriously sly and cunning, had even banded together to burn and massacre tens of thousands of innocent civilians along Qiguo's borders, brazenly provoking a state too feeble to retaliate. When Xielin ascended the throne, he inherited exactly this mess. At the tender age of 17, the newly crowned emperor used iron-fisted measures to restore order. Believing that external threats must be eliminated to avoid endless internal strife, he decisively led a military campaign himself and, with fearsome strategy, annihilated 7 of those barbarian tribes in a single year, bringing solace to the tens of thousands who had perished at the border. The battles raged on, and within 3 years, Xielin had completely eradicated the 17 barbarian tribes and restored Qiguo to its former glory. 3 years ago, everyone said Xielin would be the emperor who would bring the country to its demise. 3 years later, those who mocked him were all dead, fallen by Xielin's sword. Such an emperor commands respect, but also fear. After years of war, Xielin had no interest in the pleasures of women. So when he was truly hungry that night, after his first taste of intimacy, he targeted me alone, determined to enjoy every last bit of me. The pigeon arrived just as I was pinned to the imperial desk in his study. I opened the letter and saw Lu Wei's handwriting. Zhaoning, you have honed your skills in the military camp for many years. Princess Jinyu, though a few years older than you, is delicate and naive, far from your toughness and courage. The princess has fallen gravely ill after the scare and cannot do without me. I must remain by her side. In 3 months, I will raise my troops to rescue you. Lu Wei dared not mention his marriage to Jinyu in the letter, but I had already heard from Xielin. On a certain auspicious day in 3 months, Lu Wei and the princess would wed. Lu Wei thought I didn't know. In the letter, he even tried to comfort me. In these 3 months, bear with it and continue to lure the enemy deeper, and I will come to rescue you from this fire. Xielin's voice dripped with acid as he commented, since you've become mine, you're not allowed to think about other men in front of me. I blatantly sold Lu Wei's letter to Xielin. He dares to say he will rescue you? Xielin raised an eyebrow, his hand adorned with prayer beads encircling my waist, his breath mixing with mine. Do you want me to save you back to you, to continue your male disguise pretending to be someone you're not? Or do you want me to save you and return you to a life where you're just another woman to that prince? I instinctively wanted to defend Lu Wei, but the words Xielin spoke were flawless, and I couldn't refute a single one. Zhaoning, I possess you, and you can possess me completely. He continued, possess me as the princess of Zhaoning, not as Lu Wei's nameless, faceless shadow in the military. Compared to Lu Wei's side, which is a true hell, he's not saving you. Zhaoning, only you can save yourself. Xielin's gaze was intense, his eagle-like eyes cutting through my skin and seeing the unwillingness and desire within me. He gently tilted my chin. You figured this out, didn't you? That's why you climbed onto my bed last night. I was exposed, but by now my pride had already been thrown away. So, instead of feeling shame, I gave a light laugh and boldly leaned into Xielin's ear, softly exhaling. 3 months, that's enough time to carry a child. I reached for Xielin's belt, pulling him closer. Your Majesty, can you do it? The bamboo leaves outside the window swayed in the wind, and the pens on the desk clattered against each other. I grabbed a pen and paper, hurriedly scrawling a reply. General, the enemy has already advanced. Once done, I quickly tied the letter to the pigeon's leg, stroking its soft feathers. The pigeon flapped its wings and flew off towards you. Now, I could fully focus on responding to Xielin's actions. 1 day later, Lu Wei received the pigeon's letter. Upon opening it, he saw the exaggerated, erratic handwriting. He studied the words "the enemy has advanced with confusion." Had Jianing hurt her hand? Why did the writing look so shaky? Many strokes were wavy, trembling with great intensity. A sharp pang of sorrow pierced his chest. It seemed that Jianing was suffering in Qiguo. Looking at the words "General" written on the letter, memories of the past 10 years at the border flooded his mind. Whenever the enemy was at the gates and things seemed impossible, Jianing would always be there, softly saying, "General, I'm here." Lu Wei pressed the envelope with the word "General" against his heart. He made a decision. After marrying Princess Jinyu, he would immediately set out to rescue Jianing. This moment happened to be witnessed by Princess Jinyu, who was passing by the window. She didn't make a scene immediately, but later that afternoon, she went to the palace and reported to the old emperor. "Father, Jianing's harm to me wasn't because she was ignorant. She has long been in league with Qiguo, a spy planted in the military camp. Lu Wei is kept in the dark, but if he wants to bring troops to rescue Jianing, I ask that you do not allow it." When Lu Wei learned that Jianing had entered the palace, the old emperor had already issued a decree, proclaiming to the world. That decree was quickly passed through spies to the Qiguo imperial palace. These days, I had been feeling lethargic. The effects of the muscle-relaxing powder had long worn off, but I felt even more drained than when I had been on the medicine. Cielin wanted to summon a doctor, but I suspected it was due to my excessive indulgence, not wanting to have the doctor reveal it, so I repeatedly declined his offers to check my pulse. When the report came today, Cielin didn't want me to see it. But I insisted, and he sighed, handing me the report. His gaze was filled with pity. "After reading it, don't cry," he warned. I opened the report with confusion, and it read, "The sixth Prince Yuning has betrayed his country, aiding the enemy in treason. He is guilty beyond redemption and will be expelled from the royal family. No one is to send troops to rescue this traitor." I trembled as I held the report. Anger and sorrow surged to my head. My throat filled with a metallic taste, and I vomited blood, which splattered across the words "betrayed the country" on the report. Cielin rushed to hold me in his arms. The last thing I was aware of was the feeling of being tightly embraced by this enemy emperor, hearing his voice trembling as he ordered someone to fetch a military doctor. When I woke again, the elderly doctor was checking my pulse. Upon seeing me open my eyes, his face lit up with joy. "Congratulations, noble one. You've been pregnant for a month." I froze for a moment, my hand instinctively moving to my abdomen. Cielin was elated, perhaps trying to cheer me up. He leaned in close and whispered in my ear like a child proudly boasting, "I told you, I'm quite capable." He ordered that I be made a noble consort. "When the child is born, whether it's a prince or a princess, you'll be my only empress." I shook my head and told Cielin, "It's not time yet. Isn't Lu Wei supposed to marry Princess Jinyu in 3 days? I need to write him a letter. Bring me paper and ink." Cielin was displeased. "You're still thinking about that man? Now that you're carrying my child, why won't you settle down for me?" His tone, filled with irritation, made him sound like a neglected wife rather than an emperor. As I began to write, I tried to calm Cielin, who was acting like an agitated lion. I heard that Princess Jinyu's grand wedding had been in the works for 3 months, and I planned to send her a special wedding gift. I wrote a letter to Lu Wei, recounting the bond between us. The letter was long, detailing our past, and Cielin read it with clenched teeth, as if drowning in jealousy. After handing the letter to the pigeon, I returned to the desk, took a large sheet of rice paper, and began to sketch. "What are you drawing?" Cielin asked, walking over. "The border defense map of you," I replied. "Isn't this something your majesty has always wanted?" Cielin surprisingly pressed my hand down, stopping me from drawing. "I only asked you to reveal the defense map to test your sincerity back then. Now that we have a child, I trust you completely," he said. "Jianing, I don't want you to bear the guilt of betraying your country." I replied quietly, "The emperor is a foolish ruler. The princess is a woman who plunders the people's wealth for a wedding, and the general of the state is a heartless man who shifts loyalties. This country will fall sooner or later. Xialin, your iron cavalry will eventually trample Yu's lands. Instead of spilling blood across 1,000 miles and piling corpses in the fields, it's better to use the defense map to break Yu's border without shedding a drop of blood. All I ask for is your promise to treat the people and the surrendered soldiers with kindness. Xialin's voice grew firm as he promised, I will never harm your people. I grabbed a bloody intelligence report lying nearby and threw it into the fire, watching the flames rise. I smiled coldly. Since Father has determined I've betrayed the country, I'll show him what it means to fulfill his every demand. The day of Princess Jinyu's eagerly awaited wedding arrived. She wore a red dress and a phoenix crown, waiting in her chambers for Lu Wei to come and marry her. As the auspicious time approached, Lu Wei entered the princess's residence to fetch her. But Jinyu remained seated at her vanity. Let the prince consort wait outside a little longer. Let the world know that marrying me is an honor for him, not because my reputation has been tarnished and he had to beg me to marry him. Her handmaidens hesitated to speak, but explained with a smile, the princess is throwing a little tantrum. Please, prince consort, go inside and appease her. Only then will she agree to leave the room. Lu Wei, used to military life, was annoyed by these theatrical games. But it was a day of joy, so he patiently prepared to go in and coax the princess. At that moment, a pigeon landed on his arm. His attention was immediately diverted to the pigeon. A letter from Zhaoning? He carefully removed the letter from the pigeon's leg. Unfolding it, he saw that the letter spanned 3 pages. Zhaoning's handwriting was clear and neat, greeting him with Lu Lang, as if we were meeting in person. The letter recalled the past 10 years, recounting all the little things between Lu Wei and Zhaoning at the border. When Lu Wei had been surrounded by enemy forces, Zhaoning had disregarded her life and led troops to help him break out. On the snowy night they were trapped in a valley, Zhaoning had cuddled with him to keep warm. Every military achievement Lu Wei had earned, from an unknown junior officer to the general who protected the state, was due to Zhaoning's support behind the scenes. The second page detailed how Zhaoning had suffered in Qiguo, hungry, cold, and humiliated. The final page was stained with a few smudges of blood. Lu Lang, that day you abandoned me in the enemy camp to save your sister, leaving me only a promise. For that promise, I waited day and night for you to come and rescue me, only to hear that you were marrying my sister. I escaped back to you, only to find that Father had demoted me as a traitor to my country. I dared not reveal my identity, running desperately to the foot of the imperial city, only to be captured by bandits. Qiguo is too far, and you refused to save me, but now that I am at the foot of the city, Lu Lang, will you still let me die without lifting a finger? The mention of the bandits near the city shook Lu Wei to his core. Each word of the letter pierced his heart like a blade, and the urgency of the situation left him no time to think further. He looked toward the direction of Ying Mountain, his eyes filled with tears. Zhaoning had risked everything to escape Qiguo for him, and now she was waiting for him at Ying Mountain. Meanwhile, the palace servants continued calling out, Prince Consort, please go and comfort the princess, so she'll leave her room. Lu Wei glanced at the letter in his hand, briefly hesitated, and then stormed out of the princess's residence, without looking back. The commotion outside startled Jinyu, who had still not left her chambers. Hearing the noise, she assumed it was Lu Wei knocking on the door to take her. She coyly called out, Prince Consort, today I demand that you carry me out of the princess's residence. But the door opened to reveal only a group of handmaidens and nannies. Jinyu's face changed. How is it you? Where is the prince consort? The nanny hesitated before responding. Your Majesty, the prince consort received a pigeon and ran off. What letter? I don't know. I only found a petal from a peony on the ground. Jinyu had long known that Zhaoning would send Lu Wei letters through pigeons. Peony petals were often included in these letters as a secret signal between them, to indicate that the letter should be read urgently. If the pigeon dropped a petal, the contents of the letter were no longer important. Jinyu's fury exploded as she grabbed the petal, threw it to the ground, and crushed it with all her might. Lu Wei, You actually ran off because of a letter from Zhao. You care that much about her. Because of her, you've humiliated me today." She tore the wedding crown from her head and smashed it to pieces in front of the noble guests in the courtyard. After fleeing from the wedding, Lu Wei rode hard to the military camp on the outskirts of the capital, assembling 3,000 troops to head straight for Ying Mountain. He surrounded the entire mountain and issued a strict order. Anyone trying to leave the area would be killed. Lu Wei gave the command, and 3,000 soldiers with long spears stationed themselves at every entrance of Ying Mountain. Soon, soldiers brought forward a man, draped in silks and wearing a menacing mask, accompanied by several servants who were shouting in high-pitched voices. "Bold! Impudent! How dare you? Where is Zhao?" Before the man could finish speaking, Lu Wei rushed forward and kicked the man squarely in the face. The force of the kick not only knocked the man to the ground but also shattered the mask. The man's face was revealed, and the soldiers gasped in shock. "It's the Prince of Yu?" A day before, the King of Yu had caught a pigeon in the imperial palace. On its leg was a drawing and a short letter. The drawing depicted a colorful horse, and the letter read, "There is a color-changing horse at Ying Mountain, Your Highness. If you come secretly to Ying Mountain, I will show it to you." During my years in the imperial palace, I was often poisoned and nearly drowned several times, all of which were staged to appear as accidents. My father never defended me, and to survive, I had no choice but to flatter the foolish King of Yu. Though he was foolish, he had been taught a few selfish tricks by his mother and never truly paid attention to me. But he was the most easily manipulated safety net in the palace, so I began raising pigeons. Pigeons were an exciting novelty for the mentally limited King of Yu, and he believed every word in the letters. At first, I piqued his curiosity by copying mythical creatures from the classic of mountains and seas. Later, I used simple words to manipulate his actions. Whenever I had to appear by the palace's lake, I would use the pigeon to inform the king a day in advance. "Tomorrow, there will be a frog diving performance in the Imperial Gardens pool." The time I was pushed into the water by an unknown eunuch and nearly drowned, the King of Yu, who had come to watch the frog performance, saved me by sheer coincidence. Once, when the Queen Mother invited me to a banquet, I informed the king in advance through the pigeon. "Tomorrow, the pastries at the banquet will contain night pearls that glow with 7 colors." On the day of the banquet, the king grabbed all the pastries from my plate and stuffed them into his mouth. The Queen Mother was horrified and rushed to stop him, but the king was poisoned. Only after he was harmed did my father punish the Queen Mother lightly and decide to throw me into the military camp to fend for myself, so I wouldn't drag down his precious King of Yu. The mentally limited are easiest to manipulate, and after 10 years, using the same trick, I was able to lure the King of Yu to Ying Mountain and keep his secret safe. On the day of Princess Jinyu's grand wedding, no one noticed that the King of Yu had secretly gone on a tour to Ying Mountain. Soon after, Xia Lin told me, "Lu Wei has been stripped of his military power and imprisoned." Stripping him of military power was the least of it. I blew on the calming medicine in my bowl, my expression calm and detached. To cross the Emperor's orders, calling on 3,000 soldiers privately, and to surround the prince on an unauthorized trip, this alone will make my father believe Lu Wei is trying to rebel. Lu Wei's power had already exceeded what my father could tolerate. This incident gave him the perfect excuse to remove a dangerous minister. By this point, Lu Wei's 9 family members had already been condemned to death, but there was still a way to alter the outcome before the axe fell. Xia Lin, like a patient teacher waiting for a student to answer, asked, "Who can save him now?" "Of course, my good sister, the princess," I replied. But sadly, from the moment Lu Wei called off the wedding, Jinyu's purity and reputation were destroyed. The people were already gossiping. Princess Jinyu lost her purity in the enemy camp and was abandoned by General Lu Wei on their wedding day. My sister, who had been so deeply in love with Lu Wei, now wanted nothing more than to see him dead. A coldness swept over me, and I smirked. Whether it was Lu Wei, Jinyu, my father, or the King of Yu, none of them ever valued my life. But to let these traitors tear each other apart, all it took was a letter from me. Xie Lin commented. Understanding human nature is the key to victory. I turned to Xie Lin. Your Majesty, when you let me into your camp, wasn't it because you understood my desire to survive? You were waiting for me to climb into your dragon bed, weren't you? Xie Lin didn't deny it, but instead countered. When we captured Jinyu, I also received a pigeon. The letter detailed the exact day and time the princess would visit that mountain valley to admire the flowers. I recently noticed your handwriting on the letters and realized it was yours. He smirked. My little fox, you planned for your sister's capture, and even I was part of your plan, wasn't I? I smiled. Jinyu was right when she accused me of betraying her. She wasn't wrong. I wanted her dead. Lu Wei betrayed me for her, then let him die along with her. As expected, after Lu Wei was imprisoned, Jinyu did not beg for his release. Instead, she went before the emperor, fanning the flames and bringing up old grievances, accusing Lu Wei of committing a great crime by trading the prince for the princess on the battlefield. He neglected to protect the princess first, then used the prince to exchange for the princess afterward. Even if I am no longer favored, I am still the legitimate prince, representing the face of the Yu royal family. As the general, Lu Wei had not only failed to break the situation, but he had indeed made a trade with two royal relatives. This wasn't just about insulting the emperor's face, it was an affront to the entire morale of the Yu kingdom. This was why Lu Wei had asked me in the letter to help him atone for his sins. He must have known his wrongdoings and had been hoping for a stroke of luck. Lu Wei had always carried this hidden crime. Previously, the emperor had let it slide for Jinyu's sake, but now, after his broken marriage with Jinyu, the crime was being held against him. With Jinyu no longer protecting him, his rebellion, his broken marriage, and his cowardice on the battlefield were all used against him, and Lu Wei, along with his family, was sentenced to execution. But on the day of his execution, Lu Wei escaped from prison, using his military influence to launch a rebellion. It is said that both the old emperor and the empress were pierced by Lu Wei's sword, while Jinyu watched. The noble princess Jinyu was so terrified that her clothes were soaked through. Lu Wei lifted her off the ground like a dog. The worst mistake I ever made was exchanging you, this worthless woman, for the best Zhaoning on the battlefield. I will rescue Zhaoning. I will use all of Yu's power to bring her back. Lu Wei seized the throne and declared himself emperor. His first act as emperor was to issue a challenge to Qiguo. As if that wasn't enough, he also sent me a pigeon with a letter that read, Zhaoning, the old emperor forced my hand, so I killed him. But don't be afraid, I know you hate him too. He killed your mother, he exterminated your maternal family, and he made you live like an insect in the palace. I killed him for you. I've avenged you. Now I am the emperor of you, and I will rescue you. I want you to return as Princess Zhaoning in the open. I want you to be my empress. The handwriting on the letter became more excited toward the end, especially the words Empress. I could almost imagine Lu Wei grinning from ear to ear as he wrote them. Words can be infectious, and this letter, if shown to anyone unrelated, would convey the writer's excitement and joy. It was as if Lu Wei had turned into a little man, shouting to me through the letter, I'm coming to save you. I'm going to make you my empress. But all I could think was, how noisy, like a fly buzzing around. And how untimely. I found myself strangely agitated. Dear son, smile for your father to see. I heard Xie Lin coaxing the baby. Following the sound, I looked over and saw Xie Lin, in his black and gold dragon robe, joyfully holding our 1-month-old son. He had made countless enemies and caused entire nations to fall, so it was inevitable that a chilling, bloodthirsty aura surrounded him. His imperial presence was enough to frighten a child to tears. At first, every time our son saw him, he cried uncontrollably. Xie Lin, frustrated, reflected on his actions, finally attributing it to his deep, rough voice. He even asked me for advice on how to soften his voice. Having disguised as a man for so many years, I had experience with voice modulation. During the postpartum period, I had nothing to do, so I taught Xiaolin how to control his voice. He was more dedicated to learning this than to reviewing imperial edicts. Eventually, he mastered the technique of altering his voice, speaking in an overly gentle tone as he cooed to his firstborn son. But sometimes his voice cracked, waking the baby from his near slumber, causing the child to cry loudly. The baby urinated on Xiaolin's face and drooled on his dragon robe, yet Xiaolin showed no sign of anger. But when his voice cracked and woke the baby, he would mutter in frustration, "I can be an emperor, but can't I also be a voice modulator?" At that moment, I sat by the window in the imperial study, quietly watching Xiaolin tenderly soothe the baby. I forgot to mention that from the moment Lu Wei was imprisoned and the subsequent rebellion and declaration of himself as emperor, it took a full year to mobilize the army and declare war on Qiguo. In that year, not only had my belly grown, but the baby had also reached his first full month. As for the promised 3-month wait, he didn't come, and of course, no one waited for him. Xiaolin, shaking his prayer beads, continued to amuse the baby, making a soft, resonant wooden sound. The baby giggled and reached for his father's beads. My earlier restlessness melted away, and I lazily picked up my pen, replying, "Today is my son's full-month celebration. Don't come and ruin the fun." In Qiguo, the imperial palace held a grand feast for the prince's full-month celebration, where the emperor and empress celebrated with the people. Upon receiving the letter anew, Lu Wei spat blood on the words full-month celebration in shock. When I next saw Lu Wei, he was the emperor of Yu, and I was the empress of Qiguo. The man standing beside me was no longer the general I once knew, but Xiaolin, the emperor. A year had passed, and Lu Wei had finally remembered to inquire about my true situation in Qiguo. He learned, on the first day I was captured and brought to the enemy camp, I had become Xiaolin's bed slave. In the first month, I climbed onto Xiaolin's dragon bed, and within the first year, I gave birth to a son, rising from his concubine to become his empress. Lu Wei regretted deeply. He finally understood the price one had to pay to survive in enemy hands. He wished to believe that I was coerced by Xiaolin. "Zhaoning, I regret it," Lu Wei said earnestly. "You are far more precious than Jinyu. I shouldn't have abandoned you for her." "I'm sorry, Ningning." "Ningning? Is that what you call me now?" Xiaolin's hand rested possessively on my shoulder, his posture domineering. "Zhaoning is now the empress of Qiguo. Lu Wei, don't defile my beloved wife with your filthy words." Lu Wei's eyes, which had been red with the onset of tears, flared up with rage at Xiaolin's words.
What are you then?
"You lustful tyrant. Do you really think Zhaoning would ever care for you? You forcefully took her. Her heart belongs to me." Before Lu Wei could finish, I hugged Xiaolin in front of him and kissed his cheek. Lu Wei nearly fell off his horse at the sight. He steadied himself, his face full of anguish. "Zhaoning, have you truly betrayed your country for a man? Jinyu was right about you." I composed myself, my expression serious. "Lu Wei, though I am a royal princess, I have never enjoyed any of the people's wealth. Yu's mountains and rivers raised me, and I spent 10 years guarding the border, protecting Yu's land and its people from the 17 barbarian tribes. I believe I have fulfilled my duties as a princess, but what has the royal family of Yu given me in return? How did my mother die? Who exterminated the entire Yi family, my maternal family of 600 people? Lu Wei, don't you know?" Lu Wei's face turned pale. Of course, he knew these things, but he had never considered helping me seek justice. He rebelled against the emperor because he was forced into a corner, not for me. If there had been any leeway, he would have discarded me for the title of general and the royal wealth. Before my father declared me a traitor, I was only trying to survive by staying by Xiaolin's side. You and the princess smeared me as a traitor, and my own father personally ordered that no Yu soldiers were to rescue me. Since I was abandoned by all of you, why should I still care about you as my motherland? Do you even deserve it?" Lu Wei, knowing he was in the wrong, replied in a broken voice. "Zhaoning, I know you're angry, and I've brought your enemies to you. From the Yu army, a woman, filthy and disheveled, was escorted forward. It took me a long while to recognize her as the once lofty Princess Jinyu. Oh, I thought she had already died. She's still alive. Jinyu's mouth was gagged with a black, dirty cloth, and though she couldn't speak, she struggled and whined, clearly cursing in filthy language. Lu Wei's knife was pressed to Jinyu's neck. I know the hate you carry. The Empress and the Yi family were all killed by Jinyu's accusations when she was 8. Back then, my maternal family, the Yi family, had an illustrious record. They were founding heroes of the nation, loyal to the emperor. My mother, the Empress, was deeply favored. I was even in my mother's womb at that time. If not for those events, I would have been the happiest princess in the world from the moment I was born. That year, 8-year-old Jinyu came to my mother's palace to eat pastries. When she left, she falsely accused my mother of plotting rebellion. Just because of one lie, the emperor began to falsely accuse the Yi family, first stripping them of military power and then imprisoning my grandfather and several of my heroic uncles. My mother, pregnant with me, knelt before the emperor, pleading for justice. The emperor, however, was swayed by Jinyu's words, saying, "The child overheard you plotting rebellion. She's only 8. How could she lie?" In the end, the Yi family was convicted of treason. Over 600 members were executed and paraded through the imperial city. After giving birth to me, my mother died from shock and grief. The maidservant said her body was bruised and purple when she passed. The most beautiful woman in the capital was poisoned to death by the so-called wise emperor. I survived only by fate. I later investigated these events, and I heard the Empress herself praise Princess Jinyu. "My son is clever." With a single false accusation, he had that vile Empress killed and wiped out the entire Yi family. With the Yi family gone, all power in the court now belongs to us. Someone had tried to clear the Yi family's name, but Jinyu boldly challenged them. Even if I did mishear, I was just a child. Who would dare blame me? I had once pinned my hopes on Lu Wei. I willingly served as his behind-the-scenes strategist, helping him rise to the position of the Grand General of the state by securing military victories for him. Because the Grand General had the power to push the emperor to re-examine the military's past cases, I hoped that he would clear my maternal family's name. But on the battlefield, he chose Jinyu. That's when I realized Lu Wei and Jinyu were birds of a feather. The one who truly brought me closer to my goal of revenge was, unexpectedly, the emperor of the enemy state, Xiaolin. Lu Wei thought that by offering Jinyu, my enemy, I would forgive him and give him a chance. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up a longbow and aimed it directly at Jinyu's forehead. Jinyu saw that I wanted to kill her and panicked. She struggled desperately, but just before the arrow could strike her, she managed to escape. From that moment on, the situation spiraled into chaos, and war broke out. Lu Wei, thinking he could prove himself on the battlefield by showing me he was no less capable than Xiaolin, quickly discovered that his troops didn't follow his orders as expected. It was the 6th prince, not you, who taught us how to win with fewer troops, how to use intelligence to overcome. No, it should be 6th princess, Princess Xiaoning. Princess Xiaoning is our commander. We only follow her orders, the leading general declared, and soon, the tens of thousands of soldiers at the border echoed. Princess Xiaoning is our commander. We only follow her orders. For 10 years at the border, I lived among the soldiers, eating and sleeping alongside them, treating everyone with friendliness. They truly saw me as a comrade, and I regarded them as my brothers. One day, they discovered that the amiable, unrestrained prince was actually supposed to be the precious princess of the royal family. And this princess, when the hearts of the people were uneasy and morale was low, personally wrote letters to them, giving them hope. Thus, the hearts of the army and the people were firmly in my hands. In the battle, Lu Wei was left with only a handful of loyal soldiers from his old faction to help him fight. He naturally suffered a crushing defeat and fled back to the city in disgrace. Meanwhile, Jinyu, who was running for her life on the battlefield, fell into my hands. "Sister, wake up. I slapped Jinyu's face. If she didn't open her eyes, I would have slapped her harder. She opened her eyes, but I still slapped her. The slap made her turn her face to the side, and she gritted her teeth, trying to rush at me in retaliation. But her hands and feet were bound with ropes. The Imperial Guards, sent by Xielin, stood by. When Jinyu saw the guards draw their knives, she cowered. My sister had always been one to bully the weak and fear the strong. I didn't block her mouth, and she began to curse me, calling me a traitor who had surrendered to the enemy, accusing me of betraying her. I accepted her curses with a smile. I did indeed surrender to the enemy. After all, Lu Wei rebelled and killed the emperor because I manipulated him into it. I also did indeed flatter the enemy. I heard from Xielin that when you were captured, you too considered using flattery. But you wanted to survive, yet you still insisted on keeping up the royal facade, demanding that Xielin make you his empress before you would consent to marry him. Why didn't Xielin bother with you? Was it because you didn't like flattery, sister? Aren't you the one who loved stealing your sister's man the most? Look, now I'm the empress, while you're still a prisoner of war. My prisoner of war. I threw her onto the ground, and she realized where she was, surrounded by blooming peonies in a valley. It was the same valley where she had been captured by Qiguo. Do you know why this barren border had such a valley filled with peonies? I leaned in and whispered into her ear. Because I personally planted these peonies here for you, sister. Jinyu's eyes widened, terror flooding her face. You didn't come to the border to admire peonies. You came because you heard the peonies here were planted by Lu Wei for me. You were jealous, weren't you? The rumor about Lu Wei planting the peonies for me was deliberately passed into the capital for only you to hear. Jinyu stared at me in fear, but I smiled. I knew you loved Lu Wei and peonies, so I raised hundreds of pigeons to communicate with him. Especially when Lu Wei returned to the capital, I made sure to include peony petals in every letter I sent him. The reason was to show you, sister, that both the man you loved and the flowers you adored were in my hands. You were, as expected, consumed by jealousy, and you lost your mind and came to the border. Once you entered the border, sister, you fell right into my trap. Let me tell you, I was the one who leaked the information about your visit to the Flower Valley to Qiguo. The reason they were able to ambush you so accurately was all because of my careful planning. So, when you say I wanted to betray you, you weren't wrong. My plan was simple, sister. I wanted you dead. Jinyu, struggling with everything she had, tried to crawl away, but I grabbed her hair with one hand. Do you know why I want you to die here? Because when you were 8 years old, your childish lie not only led to the death of my closest relatives, but also indirectly caused the deaths of 100,000 soldiers at the border. They were once Yi family soldiers. Because of them, my father grew suspicious. That year, during the heavy snow, 100,000 loyal soldiers were trapped in a valley, waiting for reinforcements that never arrived. The 17 barbarian tribes seized the opportunity and trapped them, burning them with fire, throwing stones at them, and leaving them to starve and freeze to death. As the ice melted, they sent soldiers to stab each body to ensure no one had survived. My mother's family was not there to collect their bodies. My father, the emperor, was too busy being paranoid about whether these soldiers, who had once served the Yi family, would rebel. He forgot that these men were heroes who had protected our nation. He only wanted them dead. And so, those 100,000 loyal souls decayed in this very valley, slowly rotting away into the soil. For the next 10 years, this valley remained barren, and I, for 10 years, planted peonies here. Finally, last year, they bloomed, covering the entire valley. I knew it. The souls of those 100,000 men wanted me to lock your fate here. Jinyu's face turned ashen, her body trembling with fear. I could tell that in her eyes. I had become more terrifying than a demon. From the moment I could remember, I knew I was destined to seek justice for my loved ones and the loyal souls of my country.
Jinyu died by my hand.
She knelt among the peonies, her head bowed, her arms stretched out in front of her, her knees bent as far as they could go in a posture of begging for forgiveness. A long spear pierced her back, pinning her to the ground. For eternity, she would not deserve to rest in peace. Jinyu was dead, and not long after, Lu Wei was defeated. As a ruler with no legitimate claim to the throne, Lu Wei's foundation was always unstable. The soldiers at the front had turned against him, and his loyal troops had been worn down and destroyed by his unwise military strategies, leaving behind only a small fraction of his army. When he was defeated, he propped himself up with a knife. I came to see him. He grabbed my skirt and pulled out a small wooden sword from his chest. This wooden sword was a birthday gift I had carved for him. Zhaoning, I still remember when you said this wooden sword would make me invincible. He lifted his head, and a single tear, mixed with blood, slid down his cheek. Ningning, without you, I never knew I would fall so completely. I regret it. Ningning, can you call me General just once more? Just once. I looked at his pitiful state with cold eyes. Lu Wei, I once truly relied on you. In the first few days after I was captured by Qiguo, I waited day and night for you to ride in on your white warhorse like a hero, just as you promised me that you would come and save me. I even tried to find reasons to excuse your broken promise. You see, I was so cheap back then, instinctively trying to defend you, even though it was you who failed me. When I needed you the most, when I was helpless, you were too busy taking care of the injured Jinyu, too busy preserving her honor, too busy marrying her. My tone turned bleak. General? Ha! The general has long been dead, a hero I invented. Lu Wei, you were never my hero. So, what face do you have to tell me that you regret it? I turned to leave, but Lu Wei grabbed my skirt. He fell to the ground, blood dripping from his arm, but he still didn't let go. Ningning, it hurts. I turned back, seeing him kneeling at my feet, looking up at me, begging for my forgiveness and pity. I extended my hand to pull my skirt away. Your blood is staining my dress. Zhaoning. Xiaolin took off his outer robe and casually pulled me into his embrace as he did. I've heard everything. So, in your game, even I, the Emperor of Qiguo, am just a pawn used by you to get rid of your enemies? There's no difference between me and Lu Wei? I thought he was angry that I had used him, but instead, he was asking what made him different from Lu Wei. So now you're arguing over who's more useful, even though we're both just pawns? Of course. Pawns are categorized as either useful or useless. Fine, fine. You're more useful than Lu Wei. You're more important than him. Just a little more important? Much more, 1,000 times, 10,000 times more. You are my one and only piece on the board. Yet, in the end, I'm still a piece on the board? Xiaolin took a few steps ahead, clearly annoyed. I hurried to catch up. I really wasn't good at sweet words, but I could tell he was upset, so I needed to cheer him up. Lately, he had been throwing more tantrums than our son. Xiaolin looked at me seriously, and I thought he was about to get jealous again. Zhaoning, do you know why I didn't kill Jinyu that day? Because I wanted to exchange her worthless life for your freedom. I froze.
Why?
At that time, we had no connection. We were enemies. Xiaolin explained. I saved you, as I once saved myself when I was surrounded on all sides and left to fend for myself. Besides, after I ascended the throne, the few battles I lost were due to your strategies. A powerful enemy who hid their identity as a princess, pretending to be a nameless prince. I thought about killing you, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Since I couldn't bear to kill you, I had no choice but to trick you into coming to me, to make you mine. Just as I was moved, Xiaolin suddenly switched gears. But I really didn't expect you to climb into my dragon bed so quickly. I thought it would take at least a year, and at that, I covered his mouth, embarrassed. Xiaolin held my hand, pressing it against his chest. Zhaoning, my feelings for you are not driven by desire. It is a matter of necessity. I smiled broadly, like spring water melting the chill. I know. Let's go home. War is boring, and I miss our son. I'll take you home. As for Lu Wei's fate, I was uncertain. After I left with Xiaolin, I never looked back at Lu Wei. Some say he died from his injuries on the battlefield. Others say he went mad and spent his days caring for the peony flowers in the valley, constantly muttering about how Ningning loved peonies. But I never liked peonies. It didn't matter. To me, he was nothing more than someone who no longer mattered. Later, you became a vassal state of Qiguo, and Xiaolin never harmed the people or soldiers. Thus, his prayer beads always remained at 17. Xiaolin's prayer beads became the baby prince's favorite toy. The 18th bead was added by me. That year, our second daughter, the princess, was born. The borders were stable, and the people prospered. The 18th bead represented a prayer for no more bloodshed, for prosperity, peace, and the welfare of the people. The end.